If I was to ask you what is the strongest card in Classic constructed today, what would your answer be? What factors determine card power? Is the strongest something obvious, or is there a secret sleeper card somewhere? How would we measure this strength? Just like many other fans of the game, I've always wondered which card truly is the strongest in Classic constructed. If we were to somehow add up the value, impact, and consistency, and then condense that into one number, one sort of average power rating, then we would be able to figure out which card is the strongest. So that's what I did. I'll be using a unique formula based on metrics like floor, ceiling, consistency, and requirements, so that we can check out these strongest cards backed by math, not just opinion. I'm Tog, and welcome to We Make Best. Now, with 3,500 unique cards in Classic constructed, it would take a lifetime to go through each and every single one. So instead, I tapped into the knowledge of top level players and developed a list of 100 or so of the most powerful cards. But here's the thing. Not all cards fit neatly into the same criteria. Equipment, for instance, brings a unique starts and play, sits and play dynamic, which breaks the scale I used for standard cards. Some pieces of equipment work over multiple turns as well, and that can shift the game in ways that single cards simply can't match, so I had to exclude those. I also excluded cards that were heavily influenced by who exactly it was played against. Some of these cards easily fit in the top 10 when versing specific heroes, but are down at the bottom of the barrel when against others. So after much deliberation, I narrowed down the criteria for the strongest core card deck in Classic constructed to these 4 factors: floor, ceiling, hand size requirement, and conditions. I used these to create the formula to figure out the average value rating, or AVR for short. This number shows us the average value you'd get from playing this card every 100 times you cast it. The higher the score, the higher its ranking. And before we get started, I wanted to point out a couple things. Like I stated before, I couldn't factor in cards that relied on specific opponents because their ceiling would drastically change. Take Warmonger's Diplomacy for example. If we used an AVR metric on this card when against Azalea or Vincent, it would have an AVR rating of 5.9, which would rank it easily in the top 15 cards as it currently stands. But against a deck that doesn't care, its rating becomes a 3, which is the absolute baseline for a card being playable. Another example are other reactive cards like Sink Below, where the AVR metric skews heavily depending on if we deny specific on-hit or not. Sink, when facing up against a Nu or Aurora, has an AVR rating of 5.5, which would put Sink in the top 20, but against other decks, it drops to around a 4.3, so I wanted to exclude those as well. So despite what a card is facing up against, we are looking for the most powerful individual cards game after game. And the difference between the top 10 cards and the rest is not even close. When I ran the pro players list through our formula, the ranks flipped. Cards everyone thought were powerhouses ended up falling. Meanwhile, many sleeper picks that not a single person suggested ended up in the top 25. This formula cuts past the hype to reveal the real winners. Cards that aren't just fan favorites, but are mathematical standouts. And you couldn't have wrote it up better because the 50th strongest card is one of the notorious staples of the game, Enlightened Strike, with an AVR of 3.55. In fact, here's the chart of the top 50 cards by their average value rating. The first 2 cards to crack the top 50 is funnily E-Strike and the quote-unquote blue E-Strike Levels of Enlightenment. Command and Conquer, a card that many had in their top 10, ends up in the 40th spot with a score of 3.8. Rosetta has its highest rated card here at 29th in Felling of the Crown with an AVR of 4.3. Then we have some assassin staples in Persuasive Prognosis and Bonds of Agony, both breaking the top 25. And just above them, you'll see even more Mistveil cards in Chase the Tail and, surprisingly enough, Tooth and Claw. Aether Wildfire shows up in the top 13 with an AVR of 5.3. Nice reference for me personally to judge the cards around it. And Visit the Golden Anvil shows up unexpectedly with an AVR of 5.5. Along with Restless Coalescence breaking the top 10, Restless was a card that many Enigma players were arguing to me that it's actually Enigma's strongest card, and the numbers are here to prove it. But keep going up and we'll start to see the strongest cards in CC. Cerebellum Processor and Lumina Ascension with 6.8 apiece. Oakenfold, a card we're going to be seeing a lot of next season with 7.2. Figment of Erudition has 8.2. Spark of Genius just above that with 8.35. Then two cards that many people asked, how did they not get caught in the book bans? Bloodrush Bellows with a crazy 8.5 AVR and Codex of Frailty with an 8.9. Interesting to see how many new staples are in the top 25. It makes you wonder why she isn't the strongest hero in the game right now. Oh, that's why. Manifestations of Mirror Guy, widely regarded as the strongest card in the game right now, and that's because it is. With an average value rating of 9.1, Manifestations of Mirror Guy is the strongest card in Classic Constructed. But I want to take a deeper look into these results, because they reveal some things we knew and some things that we thought we knew. In the last 2 years, 34 of the top 50 cards were printed. Maybe an indication towards power creep. Some sets like Crucible of War and Uprising didn't have a single card make the top 50, while other sets have multiple cards that crack the top 50. Mistveil, with 12 of the strongest cards in CC right now, has a massive lead, as Welcome to Wraith and Outsiders both coming in at second with 6 a pop. Rosetta and Heavy Hitters both have 4. Arcane Rising and Tales of Aria have 3 each. Monarch, Everfest, Dynasty, Dusk Till Dawn, and Bright Lights all have 2 apiece, and the Dio Armory deck having 1. But the most interesting thing that these numbers reveal is that the most powerful set ever printed, Mistveil, not only gaps the strongest 2 sets, but each hero from Mistveil beats complete sets as well, with most new decks running 7 of the top 50 cards in their current deck lists, and Enigma and Zen both running 6 each. And on the topic of Zen, you have to consider that there are 2 cards currently banned from his deck, with both of those cards that were banned having insane AVRs that would place them easily in the top 10. But this got me thinking, which card, banned or unbanned, has the highest average value rating? Which card truly is the strongest core card ever printed in Flesh and Blood? So here's that same chart, but with banned cards included. Belittle would be the first to break top 50 with a rating of 4.3, funnily giving it the same rating as the main card it was used to counteract in Channel Lake Frigid. But after that, we start to get into the strongest cards ever territory, Art of War being the next card in the top 50 with an average value rating of 6.0. Note, this rating was not calculated with the Banished Draw 2 effect being abused, like how Zen and Chain used to use it, so it couldn't quite possibly be much higher than this. Next is the newly banned High Octane with an average value rating of 6.5. Zen shows up once again in the strongest cards ever, with Bonds of Ancestry showing an insane 7.1 rating. These powerhouse cards all getting banned after dominating their respective metas. These cards that you can literally define as broken, but among them all, a card stands above the rest. A card so far ahead of everything else, it's almost unfair. For people that weren't around during its time, let this give you a perspective on Awakening, with an average value rating of 16.2, leaving it in a league of its own, even among the strongest cards ever printed. I hope you all enjoyed.